again, because it's so important for us to see like, okay, this is a person who's likely experiencing the same amounts of racism, the same amounts of internalized whiteness, like all similar obstacles, perhaps similar upbringings, or even like tougher upbringings than I had. And they're still out here making it. That's really huge. And I think this is why it's so important for us to show up in our full glory as Black folks, because there's still so much representation that needs to be created for the folks behind us. And the more we expand into our full glory, our full Blackness, our full power as Black people, Black business owners, Black leaders, the more we bring up other people who just needed to see one other person doing it. And even if it's just like literally one step ahead of them, you don't have to be a 7-figure business coach. You could just be like a person who actually took the leap to start their business. When we stand up for ourselves, we lift up our communities behind us, even if we're not doing it 100% intentionally. We're just, again, being revolutionary and showing up and being ourselves. So that representation is huge for us as human, for us and for the people who are watching us and witnessing us.
Nothing. There's no barrier stopping you, but the things that you're telling yourself about the mess that you have going on, right? And, I just want to encourage people to not let their mess block the message that's going to transform someone else's life.
You're listening to the Black to Business podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall.
Sometimes there isn't a blueprint when it comes to being a Black business owner. Oftentimes, no one is doing what you're doing or trying to do, so that's why it's so important for you to show up as your full self in your business. Not only is this important for you, but it's also inspiring for others through your actions to see that anything is possible in your own skin. I say this because it's no secret that some entrepreneurs, specifically Black entrepreneurs, struggle with integrating their identity into their brand, business, and messaging. Others conceal their identity or play down their role as owners in order to grow their businesses. And today, we're unpacking why this is happening and why it's important for Black business leaders to be revolutionary so that we continue to redefine what success as a Black business owner looks like. Joining us today to lead this conversation is mindset coach Gieselle Allen. Gieselle works with revolutionary leaders of color using a mindset-first approach, where she combines mindset, trauma healing, and intuition to help her clients create and expand their businesses and revolutionary leadership practices. During this conversation, we're really diving into why the white entrepreneurship world has missed the mark and why the cookie cutter, do as I say model doesn't work for Black business owners. This is a conversation that is real, raw, and it's necessary. So let's dive right in. Before we get into today's episode, I want to announce that we've reopened the applications for our directory, The Connect. We're looking for businesses that provide professional services that will be beneficial to our target audience of entrepreneurs who are in their startup journey. So if that sounds like your business, you may now submit your business to be listed by visiting blacktobusiness.com/theconnect. Applications are open every 4 months, and we're now accepting applications for businesses for 2022. So to give you a little more information about the directory and how you can apply, the reason we created the Connect is to provide business owners with the resources needed to grow their businesses. And being that Black to Business is a platform that assists aspiring Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses, we are often asked for recommendations for industry experts who can assist these entrepreneurs with their business needs. So we wanted to create a solution. We want to include businesses who are doing the work. And if that sounds like you, we want to help promote your business to assist you in increasing your exposure, but also letting people know about the work that you're doing to continue to push forward Black-owned businesses. So head over to blacktobusiness.com/theconnect to apply. Now let's get into the episode. So Gieselle, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I am really excited about today's topic. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am truly thrilled. I can't wait to dig into this conversation, especially to focus everything around Black folks, because so much of what I do is around people of color. I really love getting opportunities to talk about just Black things. So let's do it.
Yes. Love it. So I first want to start off by asking if you could just share a little bit about who you are, what is it that you do in your business, and how did you get where you are today?
Yeah. So hey y'all, I'm Gieselle. I am a Black American cisgender woman. I'm queer. I live on the unceded lands of the Munsee Lenape people, which colonizers have named Montclair, New Jersey. Let's see. I am a mindset coach, but I really consider my work to be so much more than that. I am a coach. I help my clients resolve and heal trauma. I'm also an intuitive guide. So I kind of wrap all of that in together to serve revolutionary leaders of color who are looking to lead in different ways, lead outside of the whitewashed capitalist norm. And the way I got to where I am today, I have been doing this coaching thing for a minute now. It's like somewhere around 4 or 5 years. I cannot tell because entrepreneurship is a journey.
Yes.
Who knows what year it is anymore? But I've been in this game for a minute. And for the first 4 years of when I was coaching, I was focusing primarily on women of color, but my practice was open to everyone. And I should clarify, it was primarily for women of color, first generation Americans, third culture kids, immigrants, and femmes of color. That was what my practice primarily was, but I wasn't quite claiming that. And I was really reticent to. I hadn't seen a lot of examples of folks claiming that kind of stuff in these internet streets. And I was really concerned that I would be missing out on these white dollars if I really just went ahead with that niche. I was really believing I was really believing a lot of those stories around folks of color don't have as much access to funds. Folks of color won't pay. Like you won't make as much money if you don't work with white people, all of the things. And then last year I actually had like surprisingly a good white coach who was really pushing me to own this part of my story, own really like the primary parts of the work that I do, which again, were with women and femmes of color. And I, at the same time that was happening, was having a lot of experiences where I was in programs that were being marketed as neutral spaces, but they were really white spaces. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? Yeah. And I found myself drowning in these spaces, suffocated. And this is even before the racial reckoning that wasn't last year. So long story short, after being in these programs and recognizing this isn't working for me, and if it isn't working for me, there have to be other women and femmes of color who are feeling the same exact way. I took the leap and I started serving women and femmes of color who wanted to be in business. And since then, it has evolved as I've evolved over the past year and a half, because who has not fundamentally changed as a human being during this pandemic? Yeah. And so my business is now for revolutionary women and femmes of color, revolutionary leaders of color who are interested in doing business in different ways and leading in different ways. So yeah, that's me. That's kind of how I got to this moment. And yeah.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that a lot of people, some people can resonate with your story, and they are where you were. They are here today. And I think I'm so excited about this conversation because, like, you speak about being revolutionary. You speak about showing up as your Black authentic self. And I think that, like you said, you didn't think that there was a space for you. And I feel like people don't feel that there's a space for them to show up as themselves in their business. So that's why I'm excited to talk about today's topic, which is revolutionary leadership and redefining success as a Black business owner. So let's start off by discussing what does it mean to be revolutionary, and what does it mean to be a revolutionary leader?
Yeah. So I will say being revolutionary, I think we all will have different opinions of what revolutionary is and different perspectives. Like for you, being revolutionary might just be including a little bit of AAV up in there every once in a while. Like that might feel revolutionary. So I want to name that it's really individual. But what I consider to be revolutionary, the general like phrase I always use is interested in doing things in different ways. And that breaks down, at least in business for me, as, valuing people over profit and really instating practices in your business that value people over profit. By the way, you are also one of those people. So creating a work schedule that actually supports your body and your nervous system, allowing yourself to rest in what can feel like an inordinate amount, right? I also consider being revolutionary to being deeply collaborative, right? Not trying to do everything on your own, being interested and looking at and bucking the norm of how we are participating in capitalism and seeing if we can participate in capitalism in a way that feels a little bit more conscious and a little more just humane, which I know can feel like an oxymoron for anyone who is familiar with trying to do these kinds of things. Also being community based. I would consider to be revolutionary. But at the end of the day, if you're interested in doing things in business in a different way and you're interested in leading in a different way, that is revolutionary. And the last thing I would say is that just daring to show up as a Black human in this entrepreneurship space and saying, I am me and I'm not going to squash and change myself, that in itself can be revolutionary as well.
Yes, totally agree. And Gieselle, as a mindset coach, why do you feel that some entrepreneurs, specifically Black entrepreneurs, struggle with integrating their identity in their brand, their business, and their messaging? And I know you spoke about some of the fears that you had of losing out on money opportunities, but also feeling like you had to compartmentalize your identity as a Black woman, and feeling as though you had to show up and cater to white folks, but also feeling that you weren't Black enough. So if you could discuss, why do you feel that these things happen and people feel this way?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of things, especially when we're going Black specific here. Let's talk about the fact that as Black folks, our entire culture is co-opted by whiteness and white people. But when we participate in it, we are ghetto, we are less than, all of those things. So that's a huge reason that comes into play, because we have had to assimilate to whiteness to be deemed as respectable. And within the Black community specifically, I think if we look back over the past few decades, our parents and I would say our parents and our parents' parents, those are really the generations that were upholding and buying into this narrative of the respectability politics, that if you just pull up your pants and if you take out your gold hoops and you wear your hair straight, that you're going to be more acceptable, you're going to be successful, and that doing anything but makes you less than, right? So we have a lot of internalized narratives that are pretty recent, very, very recent for us to be really challenging as Black people as a whole. And those internalized narratives showed up in our communities because of generations of trauma where if we weren't performing whiteness, if we weren't assimilating as much as humanly possible, it impacted not only our financial well-being, which is really important to survive in this world, but it impacted our emotional well-being because we might be harassed. And it could, in a lot of cases for Black folks, impact our physical well-being because we could be physically harassed and physically harmed. And so we don't think about those things when we're okay, I don't want to use AAV in my business. We don't recognize how deep it goes, but it really a lot of times can go back to, I fundamentally feel unsafe showing up as this full expression of Blackness. And we have to really investigate that. because it's so pervasive for us. Like I still, in relationships with white folks, it doesn't feel safe for me to show up in the fullest expression of my Blackness because you just never know how they're going to act. And you just really never know. And so that can go into your business as well, especially, you know, I see this fear showing up for a lot of folks, specifically around social media, because you don't know who's watching. It's fundamentally like, it feels like you're in a dark room with a bunch of like those eyes showing up on you, like in a cartoon. But you don't know who's there. And so long story short, those are some of the reasons why I see for Black folks that it's really hard to show up in our fullest expression of ourselves in our business.
I totally agree. And I want to ask, because I know you had initially said that you thought about, you know, like missing out on money. And I think that that's a lot of things that show out for people is losing out on money and opportunities. How did you overcome that mindset, and any advice for those who are thinking the same way?
So one thing that I really did for myself, because I really didn't have a lot of examples when I did this. I think there are more now. And especially like if you end up in community with me, you'll see a lot more examples because a lot of I like kind of gathered together a bunch of people who are doing the same thing. But something that I always hold on to in my business when I'm doing something new and I don't have representation for it is that if I want it, then it must be worth doing, that there's definitely more people in the world who did that. And I look at myself, and I recognize that I'm a Black woman. I have invested, oh my God, like tens of thousands of dollars into myself, maybe 100,000 at this point. Yeah. And like every Black woman, Black person that I know in the online space is the exact same way. And so, okay, there's all these other Black folks out here, all these other folks of color out here investing heavily in themselves. So, and like, that's just the smallest percentage of it. So there must be other people out there. One thing it really takes challenging is the ways that we look at the Black community and we look at ourselves as Black folks, because a lot of times, like I want to be really clear. I'm not ignoring statistics here. And the statistics are that as Black people, we are not as financially well as even other folks of color, but like, especially white folks. We tend to have less money. We don't have generational wealth 99.9% of the time. Like, I recognize that exists. And also Blackness is not a monolith. And we have to remember that for ourselves. Because when we remember that Blackness is not a monolith, yes, there are going to be a lot of people who can't afford what we have. And also there are a bunch of bougie Black folks out here who can, or just, and so that's what I really focused on. And it really just took as well, you know, something I talk about a lot in my work is evidence. So sometimes you either find evidence through things like representation, seeing other people doing it and saying, okay, if they did it, so can I. But as people of color, we don't tend to have evidence, which holds us back as far as representation goes. And so sometimes you have to create evidence, and you have to be willing to take a small risk to create evidence. And so that's something that I was just out there doing last year when I made this shift, is creating the evidence for myself. That we out here spending some bills, right?
Right. I love that. I love that. And I know one of the things you spoke about before, just watching you and following you, is the fact that you recognize that you're in a space to be able to be a full-time entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And I think that says a lot about people who are depending on other things for their livelihood. So for you, it's your business. Mm-hmm. And for other people, it might be, you know, they're online, they're scared to say certain things because who's watching is someone who's responsible for their livelihood.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I always like to acknowledge that privilege that I have. Like, I am capable of being my own entrepreneur. I also have a partner who supports me. And so that's something to name as well, or doesn't support me, but like could support me if they had to. And so that's just something I want to name too, as we're looking at representation for ourselves, is like, make sure the folks that you're following and that you're comparing your lives to actually have the same lifestyles as you, or they are at least talking about it in ways where they understand where those intersections exist.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you had a personal experience where you had to see a seven-figure Black coach. that showed you that this was also possible for you?
Yeah, that was something that was huge for me last year. I have since I have since seen really seen the inside of that coach's business and been like, oh, skirt.
Yes.
And I'm still out here looking for a 7-figure coach who is doing their business in integrity in the ways that I believe that I want to do business, and I believe that business can and should be done. But that person has had a really big impact on me just by their bold, unapologetic existence, because yeah, it's like we see these 7-figure coaches or we see people, making a bunch of money in their business and we're like, yeah, that's cool. Like they're doing it. But it's not until it's someone who looks specifically like us. And for me, it was seeing a specifically Black person. Like, I don't think I would have felt the same way if they were Latino, if they were Asian, if they were South Asian. It was really important for me to see a Black person again, because it's so important for us to see like, okay, this is a person who's likely experiencing the same amounts of racism, the same amounts of internalized whiteness, like all similar obstacles, perhaps similar upbringings, or even like tougher upbringings than I had, and they're still out here making it. That's really huge. And I think this is why it's so important for us to show up in our full glory as Black folks, because there's still so much representation that needs to be created for the folks behind us. And the more we expand into our full glory, our full Blackness, our full power as Black people, Black business owners, Black leaders, the more we bring up other people who just needed to see one other person doing it. And even if it's just like literally one step ahead of them, you don't have to be a 7-figure business coach. You could just be like a person who actually took the leap to start their business. When we stand up for ourselves, we lift up our communities behind us, even if we're not doing it 100% intentionally. We're just, again, being revolutionary and showing up and being ourselves. So that representation is huge for us for us and for the people who are watching us and witnessing us.
Yes, I so agree, because I was, I really want to make this full circle in that, like you said, representation matters. And if someone is out there listening, you are responsible. You have a responsibility as well to our community, and just keep going, because you're going to be that evidence for someone else. So I just love that you said that, seeing that. And I even see it in my personal life as far as business,
Yes.
Me seeing other people. I'm like, okay. And I also realized that sometimes we work so hard and we don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
all the time.
I'm realizing that even more. I'm like, okay, we're working too hard.
We are always working too hard. And it's a symptom, right, of living in a capitalist society. This is one of the things I work on with my folks, is we look at internalized capitalism. What are the ways that we've internalized living in a capitalist system? And I want to actually unpack that, because I feel like I use these words and not everyone's in the same place. So when I'm talking about capitalism, like sometimes, typically white folks, people will say to me like, oh, I thought capitalism is just about being like a free market and not having government involvement. It's like, yes. And like capitalism functions as a financial system that has impacts on us. Right. And so it has molded our culture. We can even just look at back in the 2000s when people were watching like Cribs all the time, or My Super Sweet 16. I don't know. I might be showing my age here, but but when we're watching those things, what we're watching and we're celebrating is wealth. And so capitalism is a system in which wealth is celebrated. It's always do. You are lauded when you are productive, and you are not valuable to society when you are not productive. And you view money and production as more important than your own bodily needs. And when you need to rest, you feel guilty for it because you're not producing, right? So, and that's what
that's deep. That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. I'm like, stepping on my toes.
Oh, I know, especially as Black folks, because, especially, I'm assuming, I want to clarify before I go into, so I'm assuming the audience here, everyone we're talking to, is likely Black American or has been in Black America for a minute. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Yeah. So if we look at our backgrounds as Black Americans, we this capitalist society was built on our literal backs. We are the official workers. We are we are the initial exploitation, the initial workers that built a capitalist society. We don't recognize how much of the way that the economy works now was built on the exploitation, the genocide, the harm of our people. And so that continual need to work, that continual need to move, it really can go all the way back to chattel slavery. And it still continues today because our communities, especially as women and femmes, we don't have the opportunities to just sit back and chill and be supported by partners. It's very, very rare. We have to work. Our mothers have had to work. Our grandmothers have had to work. And so working it just can feel so wrong and so wrong for us not to work, especially because specifically for Black folks, we have been, again, deemed lazy and deemed as all these things if we're not working. So showing up, working, being productive, working twice as hard is ways that we have created internal safety and created external safety and shown the world, hey, I have value. Hey, I'm not one of those Black people because I work. I'm productive.
That's so much. And how do you feel that we can get out of this? Because do you feel that, in order for us to get ahead, do you feel that participating in some of these things help us to do that? Or, how can we make sure that we're still pushing our communities forward without participating in these things?
It's a delicate balance. And one thing I want to always name is that it's going to feel really wrong to your system if you're like, you know what? I'm just going full nap ministry. I'm resting 20 hours a day, right? Like that's going to mess you up. And it's going to mess you up because I even feel it, like as I'm talking about it, like my heart races a little bit. I feel a little tight in my body. And it's because we have generations of trauma. And so the way that I always like to approach things like rest, especially for Black folks, is from a very intentional, but slow pace. And so, expanding, okay, maybe you can push yourself to take 5 minutes to just rest today. Like for a lot of people, especially folks who are caretakers, who are used to working a couple jobs and you really don't have a ton of financial means, 5 minutes can feel really stretchy for your nervous system, but it's like, okay, I can do that without freaking out. Someone else might be at a place where they can push to an hour. And so we intentionally, like the long story short, the method is to intentionally intentionally stretch it, kind of like a rubber band, so that you have more and more capacity to expand into rest and to do less, to buck up against the system. Because you as a Black person choosing 5 minutes of rest, choosing 30 minutes of rest unapologetically, that is revolutionary in itself.
I love it. I love it because, and one of the things that we're talking about bringing up here is the fact that we are redefining what success means for us. And I think that us setting that example is the way that we break down these things and stop it from happening over generations and over time. So I love that you said that. And I know that you and your clients, you work on helping them with that. And I want to also speak about, you also mentioned the fact that there is unhealed racial trauma affecting our ability to lead as Black leaders and business owners. If you could dive into why is that and how we can get to the root of this?
Yeah. And so our unhealed racialized trauma, it impacts the way that we lead, really because it impacts the way that we move through everything in life. Like I'm hoping that if you're listening, you've already kind of started to see like, oh shit, I do that thing. Oh shit, I do that thing. Right.
Yes.
And so I'm going to point out a couple ways that it can show up, this unhealed racial trauma. One of the biggest ones for Black folks is that one of the biggest things for Black folks is that you have to work twice as hard to get just as far. And we perpetuate that in our business. That one is a symptom of white supremacy culture, but it's also unhealed racialized trauma. It's a thing that our people have passed down from generation to generation in a way to keep us safe. But it's actually a trauma response to the fact that things are unfair. And so when we're functioning from that place of twice as hard, we're functioning from a place of hyper-perfectionism hyper perfectionism. And as a result, we don't allow ourselves to take certain risks. We don't allow ourselves to be messy. We don't allow ourselves to rest a little bit more. And when we don't allow ourselves to do that thing, it impacts our leadership, and impacts the way that maybe we might feel comfortable showing up in spaces where we lead, because we worry that if we aren't twice as good, if we aren't a perfect leader, that no one will respect us, because that is the trauma that runs through our bloodlines. Another example of that can be hyper individualism. And I see this one a lot with this. I think this is even stronger for women and femmes Black women and femmes, but it can exist entirely in our culture, right? Which is this, like, I'm strong, I'm resilient, I got this, I don't need no man, I don't need no one, right? Mm-hmm. And that can seem like a personality trait, because that's the really important thing to notice, is that these kinds of things, we view them as Black culture and we view them as Black personality traits, but they're actually trauma responses that have that show up and look like personality traits, and personality traits over large groups of people look like culture. And so again, hyper individualism, if we're so insistent on being strong and not being reliant on other people as leaders, well, what we're not willing to do is ask for help. We're not willing to collaborate, and we're not willing to do a bunch of the things that make us revolutionary leaders, and honestly, just allow us to do a little bit less so that we can have capacity to do more, because doing everything yourself is a surefire answer to burnout, stress, and just feeling miserable and feeling alone and isolated. So those are like a couple of the ways that unhealed racialized trauma can show up in our leadership and block us.
Thank you for that. I love it. And I want to talk about one of the things that you also mentioned is, the fact that you feel that white entrepreneurship world has missed a mark, and why the cookie cutter do as I say model doesn't work for Black business owners.
Yeah. First of all, I would say the white entrepreneurship world has missed the mark for everybody. It's not just us. For literally everybody. Because the reality is, like, no matter who you are, you don't fit in a box, you don't fit into a formula. But the reason why it's missed the mark specifically for Black folks, number one is that we are different. We have different needs. That there's nothing wrong with that. And when we participate in the white entrepreneurship world, especially when we're folks that want to serve other people of color, we're ignoring the needs and the desires of our unique communities, which are just different than white folks. On top of that, the truth is that no cookie cutter formula can work for anyone, because we're all individuals with different needs. Like taking out race, even though race is like, for a lot of us, I know for me, it's the most important identity I hold. But there's really, you can't expect to follow a model. You can't expect to follow a formula in business, in leadership, in really anything, and get anywhere. So if what I see for a lot of business owners, especially the folks who are in the online space and who are following specific business coaches like formulas and things like that to success, we follow them. We do it with all our might. I've been there. And then you're like, wait, why ain't this shit working for me?
Right.
And this shit ain't working for you because it's not right for you, because your communities, everyone, they just have individual needs. And instead of trying to fit into this box that was never made for you, we want to create a box that is made for you. It's made for your culture, made for your values, and a box where you can actually thrive and be successful in, instead of trying to just make yourself small enough that you fit in it.
So how can we begin to create these new rules to live by in our businesses? And I know you talk about the fact that we have to start to do hard things, and it's important to do hard things, and it's okay to be imperfect when doing so.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing that we can do, and it's the way that we start finding our individual ways, is asking ourselves what we need. Because as Black folks, I think we don't ask ourselves enough what we need, because we live in a culture that doesn't care about what we need. And so the most revolutionary thing you can do is really to sit down every day and say, what do I want here? What do I need? And start basing your business decisions and the ways you do things, not off of what is quote unquote right, but what is right for you, because those are going to be two completely different things. And you can start moving in this direction, start creating your own formula, if you will, by sitting down every day, like I said, asking yourself those questions. What do I need? What do I want? If it could work anyway, how would I do it? And from there, trying out one of those things in like the smallest of ways. And I want to be clear that it might feel for some people like it's too much to try those things. Like just even asking the questions and being confronted with, oh shit, I actually want and feel like I should do things in a completely different way than I'm doing them right now. That might be hitting your capacity for what you have to stretch into that day. That's fine. But for some of you, you might have a little more capacity. So for example, one of the things for you might be, all right, I'm going to do marketing. I'm going to change my marketing up. Like maybe I'm going to run ads instead of hanging out on Facebook. Maybe I'm going to do one-to-one conversations instead of writing a newsletter. And you try that out for one day and see how it goes. And you want to start marking the evidence for yourself. Like I mentioned earlier in the episode, when it goes well, it's going to go well. When it goes well, for you to start following what's right for you. And that's how you kind of build up the snowball, right? You try something, try like a little thing every day. You mark the evidence when it goes well, and you build on that, because trying out the thing, marking the evidence when it goes well, that's what helps you expand your capacity to start creating your own rules and recognizing, hey, wait, doing this thing on my own, it can work. I want to name as well, though, there's going to be moments where it don't work. Like I have this moment.
Hard things.
Yeah. There's going to be moments where it doesn't work. And that is okay. Something to remind yourself with that one is that just because something didn't work in this moment doesn't mean that with a tweak or with some more continued effort, it won't eventually work. That's something that happens. It's like when we're doing something that's countercultural, in the entrepreneurship space or anywhere in our lives, the like first second that like we stub our toe or something, we're like, well, that was it. I tried. It was awful. But we'll continue to do like the horrible crap that we don't want to do, but that society says is right for us forever. Right. So just recognize like, okay, it didn't work in this moment. Like, how can I use this as a building block to get closer to the thing that I want to do?
Yes, you have to be relentless and not give up, because again, representation, again, setting evidence. And Gieselle, I really have to ask you this question because I have a huge issue with it, not for me personally, but when I see it. So there are several articles that are written as well as other evidence that shows that Black business owners conceal their identity or play down their roles as the owner in order to grow their business. So let's unpack, why is this happening and the impact that this has on the Black.
Yeah. So this is happening for some of those reasons that I mentioned earlier. This is definitely internalized. This is definitely internalized racial trauma, intergenerational racial trauma. And so we do these things because we know that our Blackness, when white folks view our Blackness, they view us as less than. They don't want to pay us as much money. They don't want to invest in our businesses. And we have to, like, our best shot is being the right kind of Black person, the most tolerable version of Blackness, which is basically like as white as humanly possible.
White face.
Yeah, it's like, that's our only path to success, or that's what it can feel like. That's a lot of the representation we see in this world. Even when we see successful Black folks, we see them assimilating a whole lot. It's very rare to see a successful Black person who is showing up in their full expression of Blackness. I would say, with the caveat that I think there are some people who are using Blackness in a way that isn't acceptable for them, as like a little bit even like a caricature. Like you might see like, I don't know, don't fight me y'all, but like a Kevin Hart or like someone like that. Like it's like those are like rare instances where it's okay to be Black, because it's like, well, it's funny to be Black. I don't know. Anyways, all of this to say that this impacts this like knowing that we have that being Black is not enough, that it's going to get in the way almost. I'm using that in air quotes because I don't believe this, of our success. That's what stops us. That's what makes us conceal who we are and hide ourselves. Let's talk about how this impacts us. This impacts us as Black folks because when we are showing up as half-assed versions of ourselves. And when we are assimilating to whiteness, we are stripping out so much of what makes us beautiful. Y'all are listening to the Black to Business podcast. So I know you agree that Blackness is beautiful. Blackness is joy. Blackness is an important part of your identity, or you wouldn't be listening to this. So when you are stripping out the most important, or one of the most important parts of your identity, you are automatically showing up as hollow. You're automatically showing up as a less vibrant version of yourself. And that's going to impact your success, because a lot of the times when we're in business, people aren't investing in the concept. They're investing in the visionary. Same if you're like a solopreneur. People like, yeah, they kind of care what you offer. Like with my work, people like kind of care what I offer. But usually when I talk to folks, they're like, but just how can I work with you? Like, that's all I care about. Like, put me in whatever. So here's my credit card. Just let me be in your presence. Right. And so that's the thing, is like when we're showing up as half versions of ourselves, we're automatically stifling our success. So it's really important for us to start stretching our ability to be comfortable being blackity black out in this full world, because that's when we are our most vibrant, our most joyous, and our most full as human beings. And Black joy is like, can change the world. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And it creates revolutions in itself.
That was so good. See, I needed you to say that because I knew you were going to say it real, and you were going to give us all the good curse words we needed. And I think that people need to feel that. So speaking of, you show up as your authentic self, and people love to work with you because of that. And speaking of, just how you speak, I think that's the thing that drew me to you. And I was like, I got to get her on the podcast. And that brings me to my next question of us. Some people feeling that they have to code switch and thinking that they can't use or should use Ebonics and African American Vernacular English, AAVE, in business. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are that it is BS, and that you should use it as much as humanly possible, y'all. And I also want to say that I want to acknowledge here that it takes intentional work. I feel myself code switching when I'm around white folks, when I'm around other things. Like even as I'm on this podcast, right? Like I'm showing up as my fullest version of myself. And also there's like probably a 10% code switch because I'm so used to being like more white when I'm on. Like I'm better. I will say, like, I sound like I was born in California, and pretty much no matter whether I'm like fully with my Black family or whatever, like I don't know what happened to me, y'all. I was born in Baltimore. Do not sound like it at all.
Baltimore. To you. That's how you all say. I love it.
So yeah, it's like I will say it takes intention. It takes noticing, like, oh, is my voice getting like a little more professional here? Is my voice getting a little bit higher? Am I articulating my words a little bit more than I might like mumble when I'm just around other Black folks who understand the Black folk mumble, right? And so you have to start paying attention to it and intentionally practicing, not code switching. You have to intentionally practice bringing in more of your natural expression. And again, as I say with everything else, because I always like to approach things from a trauma-informed way, take it slow. Don't, especially when we're talking about showing up and being seen, that's one of the most vulnerable things we can do. And so when you're practicing bringing AAVE, Ebonics, Black Speak, whatever you want to call it, I don't know who's ever called it Black Speak before this moment, but here you heard it here first. When you're practicing bringing that into your business and your messaging, take it slow, see how it sits in your body. If you feel like you have a vulnerability hangover afterwards, or like you're thinking about it, you're ruminating about it afterwards, means you went too far. So do even less the next time. And just practice, notice. And again, mark the evidence that it's safe when you do it. But long story short, bring it in, especially because I don't know if you've seen this, Monique, but I've seen this a lot in like checking out other people's businesses who are Black or folks of color. If you want to serve Black folks, if you want to serve people of color, you got to show us that you're for us. I was just talking about this with someone today, right? It's like every Black person ain't for us. And
all skin folk ain't kin folk.
Exactly. Yes. All skin folk and kin folk. And so if you want to serve our communities, signal that you're for us by showing up in that expression of yourself, speaking directly to us. That's something that I really see for folks, is that a lot of times we don't recognize when we're speaking speaking in a neutral way, we're actually speaking to white people. We're not speaking in a neutral place. And so, yeah, showing up, being your full expression of self, it actually signals that you are safe to folks of color and that you are doing this work for us, which 99% of people of color, 99% of Black folks specifically, we doing this shit for ourselves, our communities, because if we don't do it, no one else will.
Yes. And totally not speaking about, because I know I'm from the South and sometimes my accent is very thick and I just hate repeating myself. So people are like, what did you say? Even Black people. And I'm like, okay, let me speak slower. So I find myself having to speak slower because I talk really fast. So yes, I love that. And Gieselle, I want to ask you about, so initially when you started your business or just got into the space, you also had an experience where you were saying, okay, I'm going to focus on Black people and people of color, and you were not resonating, your messaging wasn't initially resonating with those people. Wasn't. So how were you able to shift your messaging?
That's a really great question. I completely forgot about that. I
did my research.
You did do your research. I appreciate you. Yeah, when I first started moving into women of color, it wasn't resonating. It was because, y'all, I was still talking to white folks a little bit. I was still talking the way that white folks talk. I was talking about things that white folks care about. And so really what I did is exactly what we were talking about earlier around trying to do things our own way. I was like, this shit ain't working. I was like, okay, why don't I try this different thing? Why don't I talk about it this way? Why don't I actually interact with other folks of color and see what they're talking about, what they're interested in, and see if I can actually find the message that does resonate with them. And what I really found was that I ended up finding my initial niche and my initial space within folks of color by really embracing my story, specifically around not feeling Black enough. I know a lot of the folks who come to me, they can sometimes hold multiracial identities. They can just be folks like me who somehow sound like they showed up in the Clueless movie, right? And we all have these, but even if you're not, I think we all have these experiences some way, some shape or form, and not feeling like we're enough in our Blackness, because Blackness is painted in a monolith and it's typically painted in this deeply horrible stereotypical way. So learning to embrace what makes me different and special and just talking about my story, it automatically created a magnet for people who were similar to me and were going on a similar journey to me. And then I was able to be like, oh, okay, now I've got my people. What do my people need? Cool. Let's move forward.
And by the way, I love the way you speak. I love how just clear you are, just so articulate. So I love it. And I love that you know that people don't think you're from Baltimore too.
People really, well, it's funny because I lived in California for 12 years, but even before I moved to California, people be stopping me and they'd be like, did you grow up in California? I'm like, no, I'm just a Black girl who was in all white classes and got literally zero Baltimore accent. I will say, I don't think either of my parents really have strong Baltimore accents either. I don't know what their deal is. So I think that's also part of the problem.
Yeah. And then there's also this whole conversation about, what does it mean? What does speaking white mean?
Right.
So who's to say what that sounds like? But Gieselle, this has been so amazing. And I know that you mentioned that people, they want to show up and they want to work with you just because of you are who you are. And they're like, okay, whatever service you have, I want to work with you. But if you could just share with us some of the services that you provide and how these can be beneficial to entrepreneurs and business owners who are looking to become those revolutionary leaders and show up as their authentic selves.
Yes, I would love to talk about that. So I do most of my work, and when I say most, all of my work via one-on-one and group coaching. So both of them, we go through the same process. We work together over a series of 6 or 9 months, depending on the program. And during that time, we unravel all the ways that internalized capitalism, internalized white supremacy for women and femmes. We also look at internalized patriarchy, how all of those things are impacting the way that you show up. We work on redefining success. If you are a leader and which by the way, everyone's a leader. But if you specifically identify with leadership and you are looking to like amplify your leadership and really do leadership in revolutionary ways, we look at defining what your revolutionary leadership looks like and stretching you into it. So that's the work that I do in my world. All of my work is really community based, and we are always talking about the things that we talked about here. So we talk about your identities. We talk about your racial identities, your gender identity, your sexual identity, your class, and like sometimes the class transitions that you've made throughout life, because that can be really important in the way that you show up. You think about money, you know, all of the things. So we really look at who you are, and it's deeply individual, deeply specific, even in the group setting, because if we're not looking at all your identities and how they come into play in the way that you are moving through life, in the ways that you've developed trauma, in the ways that you are creating your business, creating your leadership, then we're missing the mark. And so, even if you don't want to work with me, y'all work with somebody who is talking about your identities, because if they are not, they are not actually serving you, especially as a Black person. So yeah, that's what I do. I also, outside of my one-on-one and my group coaching, if you're like not feeling that in the moment, I also have my own podcast. It's called the Revolutionary Rising Podcast. And, we're currently in season 2. So there's like 2 juicy seasons for women and femmes of color who are entrepreneurs and leaders of color. And I'm also just always over on Instagram, like blessing your feed, blessing your life. So that's other ways that you can hang out with me.
By the way, I love your Instagram. I love everything you talk about on there. And, you know, if you aren't, you should be following her. What's your Instagram handle?
My Instagram handle is @Gieselle Allen. So it's literally just my first and last name. Just make sure you actually spell my first name correctly, and then you'll find me.
Yes. And then I love your podcast because I love the topics that you're talking about and the conversations that you're having. So if you can, share some of the things that you talk about on your podcast.
Yeah, some of the things we've talked about on the podcast in the past, we've talked about redefining success, and we talk about it transparently and the difficulties that you can have with redefining your success. We talk about getting a right relationship with your marketing. So actually enjoying your marketing instead of like feeling the hustle and grind of it all. We talk about productivity. We talk about rest. This season, specifically on season 2, we're leaning deeply into revolutionary leadership. So we're talking about your relationship with power and your relationship with leadership, and how living in a white supremacist and capitalist world may have like kind of messed up the feelings that you have towards those. We talk about why you might give too much, why you might feel like your relationships aren't reciprocal as a leader. We talk about feeling isolated. We talk about perfectionism. So we're talking about all these different things that impact revolutionary leaders. I'm really excited for season 2. Season 1 was like me being like, what is a podcast, Mike? How do I live? And then season 2 has really been, we're taking you on a journey on your revolutionary leadership. So I'm really excited for people to get to witness that whole thing.
I love it. I'm a subscriber. So yes. Yes. And Gieselle, I also want to end this by asking just a couple of questions about you. And one of the things that you mentioned is taking care of ourselves and, you know, just making sure that we're listening to our body. So what are some of the ways that you practice doing that?
That's a great question. Sometimes I go outside in my backyard. I'm blessed. I have a backyard. And I just watch the leaves move in the wind, or I just feel the wind on my body. That is a huge thing for me. Going outside is always a huge way to take care of my body. Another way is that I sit with my feelings sometimes, which is deeply uncomfortable and can be really scary if you don't have the somatic capacity to do that. That's something I help people fix. But I actually allow myself to have feelings. So those are some of the ways I take care of my bodies: eating and exercising in a way that is not performing health, but is actually like what my body wants and needs in that moment. That's another way that I actually support my body and my needs. Oh, and lots of naps. Always the naps. I napped right before this.
I love it. I love naps too.
They're the best.
So yes. And what has been the best risk that you've taken?
Oh, the best risk I've taken has been taking a leap into women and femmes of color. It changed my business. It changed my life. It changed who I am. And I want to say this for those of y'all who are like, Gieselle, you're like out here, you're a bleeding heart. I make more money than I've ever made as well, working with women and femmes of color. And so, yeah, I'm eternally grateful for this work. It's actually allowed me to feel comfortable. Before I was doing this work, I didn't feel comfortable around Black folks because I felt I've been bullied as a kid. I really struggled with community, and doing this work and kind of like diving head in, it's just changed my life. So, yeah.
And I love that you mentioned the fact that you've made more money than you've ever made. And I think that speaks to us taking the bet and betting on ourselves. So like you said, that risk. And then also, if someone is afraid, look at, you have an example here. But then also, you found your community so that you do feel comfortable and around Black people and your people. So I love that.
Yep.
And so what advice would you give to anyone in their first year of business?
Oh my God, your first year of business. Follow your intuition. Business is not hard. Business is not hard. People who want to take your money will convince you that business is hard, but really it's just about having a thing that you offer, telling people about it in a way that feels natural to you, and trusting your intuition. I would say that to trust your intuition as much, to like be in community with other new business owners, but don't go straight to someone who's trying to tell you how to do it. And like what's the right way to do business in the quote unquote tricks and tips, because they don't work. Like sometimes they work, but a lot of times they're just formulas that, again, like we talked about earlier, they're not meant for you. Follow your own way. You will get so far. And every experienced business owner I know is now unraveling all of the dumb crap they picked up along the way to just go back to what feels right for me.
I think this is going to be the episode where I have so many timestamps of where I don't even know where to pick the best one, because you said so many good things. It's like, follow your own way. Business isn't hard. I love that. I love that you said that.
Really not hard.
It's really not hard.
It's really not. Like it's hard and it's not, it's hard emotionally. It's a lot of pressure. It's scary, but it's not complex. It really, truly isn't.
Yes. So do you have any favorite tools, resources? And I know you have some favorite books, if you could just mention them for people who are listening.
Yeah. One of the big books that I've really enjoyed this year is What Happened to You. Oprah wrote it in tandem with, I don't know, some white psychologist, but like it was mostly Oprah that I read it for. But it's all about, it really explains trauma in this really resonant way that really like blew my eyes wide open around how trauma works in our body. And so if you're like hearing me talk about trauma, wondering what it is, I think that's a really great place to start. I also think Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder, that's a really great book that talks about how a lot of the things that we view as culture in our communities are actually internalized trauma and like intergenerational trauma. And I'm just going to give a shout out to another Black woman who is incredible and has helped me shape a lot of the ideas that I have around capitalism specifically. Business for the People, and Toi Smith, Toi Smith. You can find her on Instagram. She is a really incredible human to follow around in these decolonial streets. Yeah. Yeah. So I would definitely check her out. Yeah. That's what I would recommend.
Love it. And Gieselle, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
What does it mean for me to be Black in business? That's a great question. What it means for me to be Black in business is to be coming back to the root of what it is to be Black, because I think as Black people, we are fundamentally creative, resourceful, powerful, entrepreneurial in every crazy way. And so it's honestly being our natural selves and saying, I'm not going to let someone else dictate my well-being, the way that I live my life, the money that I make. I'm going to do that for myself and I'm going to take control. So yeah, that's what it means to me to be Black in business, to just be like totally, to be really embracing like a lot of our Blackness, because so many things of what make you a successful business owner are just the way that we operate as Black folks for real.
Love it. And how can people connect with you, find you, and support you?
Yes. So you can find me over on Instagram. I'm at Gieselle Allen. Like I said, I'm at Gieselle Allen over on Instagram. You can also check out my website, GieselleAllen.com. And that's where you can like find out about my podcast, learn a little bit more about my work. Those are the main, and the last thing I would say too, as well, is checking out the Revolutionary Rising podcast. It's a really great way that if you love this episode, like I'm just going deeper and deeper and deeper into these subjects in my podcast. So it's a really great place for you to hop over.
Love it. Well, Gieselle, this has been so amazing. I've learned a lot. You stepped on my toes. So I know people who are listening, you stepped on theirs too. But I really appreciate you just taking the time to be here and just show up and continue to do the work that you're doing and push the culture forward. So I appreciate you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate you.
Of course.
That was deep, like really, really deep. And I enjoyed every moment of this conversation. One of the things that stuck with me is when Gieselle mentioned we have to work twice as hard as others mentality being the trauma that runs through our bloodlines. This is something that I hear often, and that was a moment for me to pause, because as we continue to redefine what success for us as Black businesses and leaders look like, we have to be mindful of our thoughts. Thoughts and words have power. You're helping to create the blueprint, so that's your power. And remember that when you show up in your full glory, as Gieselle mentioned, you give others permission to do the same. This is definitely an episode that will be on repeat for me, and I hope for you too. Thank you so much for listening, family, and be sure to check out blacktobusiness.com/75 for full show notes and resources mentioned during this episode. All I'm asking for you from today is to be revolutionary and be you. Chat with you next week.